Hello, it's me, Christine. Welcome to my little crime corner. Growing up is hard enough as it is, especially when your circumstances are less than ideal. Some people have just been dealt more difficult cards, and we're all just doing the best we can. There have been a handful of cases we've discussed where it seems that the ball has been dropped, and certain instances were not taken as seriously as they should have been. This one is unfortunately no different. Today we are in Palatine, Illinois, to meet a young girl named Amber Creek. Amber was born on July 2nd, 1982, in nearby Park Ridge, Illinois. Her parents had separated when she was very young, and she spent her early years living with her mother in a town called Lake Zurich. Amber did not have the easiest time growing up, and she had a very difficult childhood. While living with her mother, it was revealed that Amber had been abused at a very young age, but luckily this was discovered and Amber was removed from this home and brought to live with her father when she was 6 years old. Amber's father, Robert, took great care of her, and she was doing very well living with him. She was a very energetic girl and had a good friend group. In school, Amber began singing and playing the violin, and she later joined the cheerleading team. As much as she tried to occupy her time, she couldn't help but to relive the trauma she had suffered when she was younger. She began falling into a deep depression as the years went on, and she was unfortunately unable to attend any type of therapy or counseling. She would often cry herself to sleep and was overcome by feelings of hopelessness. Because of this, as you can imagine, took a tremendous toll on this young teenager and sent her depression into a deeper spiral. Amber, feeling as though she had nowhere to turn, began drinking and using drugs as a means of escape. She would find herself overwhelmed and overcome with the weight of what she had experienced, and would frequently run away from home for hours to days at a time. She would later tell her cousins that she would meet up with older boys in the woods. Some of them she knew from school, and others she had only just met. After Amber had finished middle school, Robert had noticed a drastic change in his daughter. She was sneaking out of the house more and more, and he was unable to afford the residential private therapy, which at the time was running upwards of $50,000. He did what he thought was best at the time, and Amber eventually became a ward of the state by age 14. We know this obviously couldn't have been an easy decision. Amber continued to sneak out of every home and facility she was placed in, and she was eventually taken to a Northside Juvenile Residential Center in late 1996. On January 23, 1997, Amber ran away yet again, this time for good. While away from this facility, she would somehow always be able to get a hold of a phone, and she would call her family members regularly, although she never really told anyone exactly where she was. After her last runaway, she was reported missing almost immediately. Amber was last seen 2 weeks later in Rolling Meadows, Illinois, in early February of 1997 at a Motel 6 to attend a party. Although she was reported missing by the facility that she was living in at the time, police didn't initially investigate Amber's disappearance since she had a history of running away, and they did not take this as serious as it was. They figured that she would return to the facility after a couple of days. After all, she really didn't have any money or resources to be out on her own for very long. Several days had passed, and there was no sign of Amber. No one had reportedly heard from her, and the concern continued to grow. It was as if she had vanished. Looking into her last known location at the motel party had ended up being a dead end, and no one had any clue of her whereabouts. A potential break occurred on February 9th, 1997, when police were called by two hunters to a nature preserve in Burlington, Wisconsin, after they had discovered the body of a young woman with a plastic bag over her head. The night temperatures at that time had reached below freezing, and the young woman's body was frozen. When police arrived and removed the plastic bag, they discovered that her face had been slashed with a knife or another sharp object. She had also been severely beaten and had several bruises and abrasions in various stages of healing all over her face and body. As she was found, she had her palm facing up with the word "hi" written on it. The girl wasn't wearing many articles of clothing, but her jacket was found near her body, as well as a backpack with a few more of her items. Police believe that some of her personal items might have been taken by her killer as souvenirs. There was also evidence that she had been aggressively bitten on her neck, and they believe that in addition to evidence of asphyxiation and strangulation, the biting had played a role in her death. There was also a price tag that looked like it had come from a bookstore attached to her upper arm. The police believe that she was killed in a different location and then brought to where she was found. The medical examiner also found evidence that she had been raped before she was killed. Because of the condition in which she was found, initial attempts at identification were unsuccessful. There was a funeral held for this mystery girl, and more than 100 residents of Burlington attended. The casket was donated, and her headstone read Jane Doe. Although there were suspicions, the effort to identify this mystery girl took months of police working around the clock, comparing dental records, fingerprints, and other DNA from thousands of open missing persons cases. It wasn't until December 1998 that after an airing of an America's Most Wanted episode, that Robert Creek called in to report that the belongings shown on the episode belonged to his daughter Amber. It was confirmed by dental records that this girl was in fact Amber Creek. Her resting place was then marked with a stone bearing her name and date of birth. It wasn't until October 2013 when a crime lab in Oklahoma had begun going through their records and started re-examining and comparing fingerprints that they had on file from unsolved murders. 5 months later, in February 2014, Amber's case had been reopened, and fingerprint examiners were able to pull and identify a fingerprint on the trash bag as belonging to a 36-year-old man named James Paul Eaton. When investigators looked into James further, they discovered that he was living in Palatine at the same time as Amber, and at the time he would have been 19. His description matched that of one of the witnesses' accounts of seeing two men with Amber on the same night she was last seen in 1997. Because James's fingerprints were not on record at the time of Amber's disappearance, there was no way to connect him to the crime. It wasn't until he was arrested and booked for a drug charge in 2000 that his fingerprints were on record. James was eventually tracked down and followed in Chicago, and investigators were able to collect and test a cigarette butt to compare it to DNA that was found at the crime scene, and it was a match. James was then arrested at a local train station and incarcerated. Once in custody, investigators confiscated his computer and phone. They were also hoping to find some of Amber's personal items in his possession, as they had suspected that some of her clothing and belongings were taken after her murder. Police also tried to elicit a confession from James while he was being interrogated, but he didn't break. In October 2014, James Eaton went before a judge for his arraignment. The charges were first-degree murder and concealing a body. He pled not guilty to both of these charges. His trial was set to begin in November 2015, and if found guilty of these charges, he would be given a life sentence. November 2015 rolled around, and his trial ended up being pushed back due to his defense attorney claiming that they had not received all the evidence in the case, even though there was very strong evidence that James had played a heavy role, if not solely responsible, for Amber's death. The trial was pushed back yet again on May 31st and June 6th of 2016 because the defense was trying to locate an expert to examine the bite marks on Amber's neck and cheek, which, in addition to being the key identifying factor of the suspected killer, there might have also been DNA present that was collected. During this time, Amber's uncle, a man named Anthony Mowers, had expressed that he believed that others might have been involved in Amber's untimely end. He finds it hard that James had worked alone, especially transporting Amber over state lines. At the time, dental records were unconfirmed, so we didn't know who the bite marks on Amber belonged to. There were also reports that additional saliva had been recovered from the scene, but it had not been on the bitten area. There was still a lot of speculation surrounding whether or not James had solely acted alone, or if anyone else was involved. James's attorney was able to convince a judge that some of the information obtained by police through various interrogations after his arrest could not be used in court due to the fact that James had continued to be interrogated after he had made a request for a lawyer to be present. This information included how he reacted to seeing photographs of Amber as she was found. However, it was later ruled that this information was allowed to be used. On October 25, 2016, James Eaton was charged with first-degree murder and concealing a corpse. His bail was set at $1 million, but was later dropped to $500,000. Once before a judge, James pleaded no contest to first-degree reckless homicide. Since this is a significantly lesser charge, this was most likely due to the fact that another man who had not been named at the time of the trial was also being investigated for his suspected involvement in Amber's murder. James Eaton was then sentenced to 40 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 10 years. It was unclear if James and Amber knew each other and to what extent, since James was a Palatine native who had lived relatively close to Amber at the time. He later revealed that the two supposedly had a relationship, one where they would frequently engage in choking. I don't know if there is any truth to this claim, or he just knew that it was over for him and he was trying to downplay the severity of this brutal attack, that implying that based on their history, this could have been an accident. But although to me, this seems like a cruel attempt at making things difficult for the prosecutors and further hurting Amber's family. It should be noted that after Amber had originally disappeared, the call wasn't taken seriously or prioritized, most likely due to her history of running away. It's difficult to think that she might have met a different fate if the authorities had taken quicker action. Of course, you can't go back in time and change the past. You can only move forward. After Amber's positive identification, state laws were changed in an effort to prevent things like this from happening again in the future and to prioritize searches for missing persons. even ones who have a history of running away. Authorities have to treat each one as a first-time occurrence. Hopefully, this will make a difference in a lot of people's lives and give families more hope. Let me know what you think about this case. Based on my findings, many crime writers believe that this wasn't James's first brush with violence. I don't think it was either. Just please be careful and aware of your surroundings, and keep in touch with your friends and family. Just know that there is always hope, and you are worth it. If you find yourself in a tough situation, ask for help if you need it. You are not alone, and you are loved. And that is all I have for you today. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you learned something, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.